welcome to Write Now Workshop Podcast, where you can write a book and change the world. I'm your host, Kitty Bucholtz, and this is episode 17, an interview with Stephanie Shackelford about how Toastmasters helped her to become a better writer. Now, I have to say, that was an unexpected thing that I heard come out of her mouth the first time that she said it to me. Toastmasters is all about helping you become a better speaker. And the other thing I thought, well, she means nonfiction writing then. I bet it would help you to become a better nonfiction writer because Stephanie's telling us about how she became a better fiction writer from it. So if you start thinking about all the things that Toastmaster teaches, then you start thinking, oh, yeah, I guess I can see how that would work. So I hope you enjoy the interview. It is coming to you on Thursday, January 25th, 2018, and I'm just recording this introduction a couple of days earlier. I wanted to remind you, if you're liking the show, please go ahead and hit the subscribe button. If you're listening to it on a podcast app on your phone, you can do that, or if you're listening on iTunes, you can hit the subscribe button. Then you'll be notified every time there's a new episode to listen to. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can do the same thing. Hit subscribe, and then every time there's a new episode, you'll be automatically notified. And I would love it if you would tell your friends. That would be a huge help to me too. All right, that is it for announcements for me this week. I hope that you enjoy the interview. Hello and welcome to the Write Now Workshop Podcast. I am happy to have as our guest today, Stephanie Shackelford. Stephanie has been creating stories all of her life, and some have actually been written down, although none of them have been formally published yet. Currently, she's a freelance graphic designer, creating flyers, business cards, book covers, and more from Atlanta, Georgia. Welcome, Stephanie.
Thank you, Kitty. It's good to be here.
It's good to be here with you. And now I happen to be watching you on video here, and I see you've got a cute little cat who keeps walking into the picture. So
yes, DB.
DB. All right. DB, you're going to be famous. So you're going to talk to us a little bit about Toastmasters, which I just find really interesting. I remember the first time we kind of had this beginning of the discussion, I was like, but I don't understand. That's speaking. What does that have to do with writing? So tell us a little bit about what is Toastmasters, what's its mission, and what did you start getting out of it yourself?
Okay, Toastmasters is an organization dedicated to public speaking. It's helping its members to increase their communication and leadership skills. And we have local clubs all over the U.S., all over the world, actually. And each club runs a little bit different. They can run their own, have their own rules and ways of doing things. But basically, we have a time of formal speeches and evaluations and what we call table topics, which is extemporaneous speaking.
Oh, I love extemporaneous speaking.
Yeah. and you learn how to speak for 1 to 2 minutes on a topic that you don't know anything about until the question's thrown out there. I joined back in 2000. I was a member for about 4 or 5 years, and then not for a while because we moved around and all. Yeah. And I am now involved in a Toastmasters where I'm living for about 1.5 years or 2 years. But the reason I joined was because I kept wanting to say things to groups of people, and when I would get up to speak, I would not be able to say what I wanted to. And this one particular time, it was something very important, and I felt, when I sat down, I felt I didn't make my point because I froze up. And I didn't think I was afraid of the audience, but I froze up and I said, that's not going to happen again. So I went to find out if there was a Toastmasters in my area, and there was. So
wow. Okay, that's really interesting. I like the reasoning, why that you did it. That something it's actually the reason why we do lots of things. Something bugs us, we have a problem, and then we are looking for a solution. You found a solution. Nice. Yes. Okay, so it started helping your speaking, right? Which
Definitely
is what it was supposed to.
Yes. Yeah, a friend of mine actually told me that she could tell just after a couple of months in the conversations that we had that I was communicating more effectively.
Nice.
So it definitely helped with the speaking.
Okay. And then now you've been a fiction writer for, well, gosh, you and I have known each other for, I hate to even use a number, but it has 2 digits in it.
20 years.
Okay, maybe not 40.
No, not 40. I've been creating stories that long, but not actually writing them down.
Yeah, yeah. So we've known each other for a really long time, and I think that the way we met is because we were in a writers group together. So I've always known you as a fiction writer. So when in your writing career did you join Toastmasters, and when did you start seeing that there was a change in your fiction and nonfiction, if you wrote any nonfiction?
Well, I joined Toastmasters, like I said, for 4 or 5 years in 2000. That was what, 4 or 5 years after you and I had met, and we had actually moved away from. Actually, you had moved away from Arizona, and
That's
I had
right.
moved away also.
Yeah.
So we were still in contact, but not seeing each other regularly, not involved in the same writers group. I did not realize how Toastmasters was helping my writing until recently when I was talking with
Oh.
you.
Oh, how
And
funny.
yeah, I do things very intuitively. A lot of times I won't realize until much later that why I did something or what influenced what I did.
Right.
And I did not realize until we were talking really consciously that Toastmasters had helped my writing.
Okay.
I was using some of the things I was learning in Toastmasters, and I was also using things I'd learned in writing to help with my Toastmasters speaking,
Right.
which, I didn't realize until I actually consciously focused on it.
Right. Right. Okay, can you give us any examples of something? I understand that you're an intuitive writer, more of a pantser than a plotter, right?
Mm-hmm,
So,
yeah.
but do you have some trying to figure out something that would help the listener to understand, like what they might be able to get out of Toastmasters, how it could help their writing?
Right. Well, the most obvious one that I realized right away was the fact that your body language needs to reflect what you're saying. If you've got a great big smile on your face, but you're saying something mournful, people aren't going to believe you're sad, or vice versa. And so that translates into the writing by adding actions that what the character's doing, not just saying she's sad.
Right.
For example, in one of my stories that you've read, this girl is trying to figure out why these animals are dying. They've been poisoned, but she can't seem to antidote them. And when I had written the scene to begin with, she goes in and sees one of the animals has died, and her shoulders slump, and she's sad. But when I went to edit it, instead I can add impact to that, because I know I need to change her body language. She froze in place. She whispered, "No, no, no, not again." So knowing what I need to add helps me to consciously make things better.
Right. Okay. So you're telling me that in Toastmasters, one of the things that they teach you is how to use your body language when you're giving a speech?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. And so then you were just unconsciously for a while applying it to your fiction.
Yes, definitely.
All right. That's really...
I was just going to say, Toastmasters has a curriculum that you follow. When you first join, you have the curriculum is the basis. You can do other projects, but the competent communicator is a set of 10 speeches that each focuses on a different aspect. One's organizing your speech, one's using vocal variety, or another's body language. So there's 10 of those, and they focus on different areas of your speaking. And you can go through that manual as many times as you want.
Wow.
Practicing those particular lessons.
Right.
And by reading through those lessons, I can consciously see, okay, how can I incorporate this into my writing?
Right.
For example, one is on research. You have to prove your point using your research, either facts or stories, anecdotes, or whatever. So like in a story where I wanted to have something happen that seems like a coincidence, and we know you can't have coincidences in fiction.
That's right.
Really, I'd have to set up that it's not really a coincidence. So say something is happening in this neighborhood at the very beginning of the story, I can have somebody quote that, well, that particular thing happens every 2 or 3 years. I'm not sure why this happens, but this happens every 2 or 3 years. It's getting about time for something, whatever that thing is, to happen.
Right.
But, I hadn't thought of that until I was looking through the Toastmaster manual, the research project.
Right. Okay. Now, do you find that you're doing more research then, or is it the same, just the same amount, just in a different way, do you think?
Probably the same amount. It's more just consciously looking at a aspect. When I'm in the editing process, I'm not doing it at all. When I'm in the creating the story process, it's when, okay, this is what I want to refine the story and make it better. And I read it and I see the point that I need to pull out of it. And so how can I do that? And if it were a story that needed some facts or something to reinforce whatever the point is, then
yeah. Okay, so I'm beginning to notice a pattern, I think, in the way that you're explaining this. So kind of, it sounds to me that the point is that Toastmasters makes you think about what you're going to say and how you're going to say it and how you're going to present it. And you started noticing that you were thinking more about what you were doing with the words when you were in the editing stage.
Yes, that's a very good way of putting it. Like I said, I don't consciously put things together, but yes, you caught that.
I like it. That actually makes me really interested. Okay, so now I'm thinking about the program that you said they put you through. The 10 different kinds of lessons or speeches, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay, so we talked about research and that you started finding better ways to add something in. Is that right? Better ways to put your research into the story when you're editing?
Right.
Okay. And then one of the other things was body language. I have to say that the best thing that I ever did that taught me more about body language and how, again, like you said, we do so many things unconsciously that it's harder sometimes when you want to write something and you're like, I don't know how to say it. Like, what am I trying to say here? But I can't picture it because it's all kind of unconscious. But I took a improv class once in Los Angeles, and it was so interesting. The thing that stuck with me the most was, and I had been doing it every day at work for my whole adult life, but the way that we had done this one improv thing where the person to your right was above you and the person to their right was above them, and vice versa, and continuing, I mean. And then the person to your left was below you and the person to their left was further below them. And it was how you interacted with each of these people. So you were respectful to your boss, super respectful to the boss above them, probably less respectful to the person under you, really less respectful to the person under them, or whatever. And they were making these, everything was a game, so it was totally fun. But I went home thinking, oh my gosh, first of all, I need to think about how do I treat people, and do I treat them in a way that I actually find to be appropriate regardless of society's norms.
Right.
But then eventually, it did kind of work its way into my writing where I was like, oh, you know what? This person, he should be the boss, but he won't take the boss position, which means that somebody has to be the boss. So this other guy does. And the other guy, he leads the team, but he does sort of defer sometimes to the guy that everybody knows should be the boss. And I'm like, oh, I could really do more with that now that I, can really see it and play with it.
Right.
Yes. And have you done that in your writing? Like really gone into it more and went, oh, how fun can I make this?
Yes. Like I said, I'm still learning to do it consciously because it's only been recently that I've consciously noticed it. But yes, I'm looking at different scenes and what I'm wanting to portray in that scene, and so how can I make it better? And I'm starting to look through the Toastmasters manual and see if there are things that will help me do that.
Right, right. And have you found anything else besides the body language and the research?
Yes, I have some notes here. Well, the rhetorical devices, I sort of already used alliteration and simile and metaphor, but I'm a little more conscious of, and triads, doing something 3 times. I do that sort of unconsciously, but
Yeah.
like I said, noticing it helps. The one thing that really surprised me was when I realized that the way we do evaluations had found its way into my editing process.
Tell us about that.
We evaluate everything. In fact, I think that is the major strong point of Toastmasters. You get immediate feedback on the speeches that you give. You get some specifics on what you are doing well. If you're a new Toastmaster and you've only done your first speech, which we call an icebreaker, you get praised for having the courage to get up in front of people, and you don't get every little thing nitpicked. You get told what you did well and 1 or 2 things that you can improve on. If you're a more experienced Toastmaster, then you may get more feedback, but all of it is positive and supportive. It's what you are doing well, what you did effectively, and how you can improve. And when I tend to get really down on my writing because it doesn't come out the way I envision it in my head. And so it's like, well, this is just trash, and I walk away from it. I started, when you and I talked, I realized that in the process of trying to improve my editing process, I had actually changed the way I looked at my writing. Instead of seeing all of it as bad, I was starting to pick apart, okay, this is good. I need to keep this. This is saying what I wanted to say, but I just want to polish it up, to refine it and make it say it better. And how do I do that? So that was very helpful. And I realized it was because of the renewed experiences I've had with Toastmasters, with the evaluations of, you look at what you're doing well and how you're being effective.
Yeah.
And then you only work on 1 or at most 2 things to improve.
I like it. And it seems to me that particular area with the evaluations and stuff probably is something that you take with you into writers groups, particularly if they're not operating that way. Have you encouraged other people to, okay, let's just start with something positive first, everybody? Have you had that experience?
Yes, definitely. I belong to a writers group, and we all write totally different fiction. It's only a group of, it fluctuates between 4 and 10 of us that show up each time. We meet twice a month. And a lot of times, because we write such different stuff, the others don't have the words to critique it well.
Right.
I write fantasy fiction, and I'm the only one. Well, not now. There's another fantasy writer that joined us recently, but I was the only fantasy writer, and I'd be getting critiques that were like, okay, that's the way you do it in fantasy. Okay.
Yeah.
I wouldn't argue. I mean, that would be counterproductive. I would take what they said and I'd say, okay, well then I need to make it a little more clear. But I have, when I give critiques, I do try to say, this is what you're doing well. It looks like you're trying to say this, and you did that well. So yes, I definitely have carried how to do evaluations over into critiquing.
That's a great idea. I know that not all groups are there yet. So this is definitely something that I'm glad you brought up, because I think it's an encouragement to people who are in a writer's group that you can try to get most everybody everybody would be even better. If you can try to get most people on the same page with, this is the way we're going to do it, which in fact, the writers group that you and I met in, I think that was my first writers group ever, the Tempe Christian Writers Club or writers group, depending on what year it was. It's how we ended it. Was it a club or a group? I don't know, but
I don't remember.
But I remember that was like kind of the rule when we first came in, and I was like, okay, well, I've never been part of a writer's group, but that sounds like a great rule. You have to start with something positive, and you need to try not to be defensive. That was another thing.
Yes.
Now, is that something the trying not to be defensive? Is that something that you got any better at due to Toastmasters and all those evaluations? It just occurs to me that like people are starting to get tougher and tougher on you as you're there longer.
No, actually, it's not something I struggled with a lot. At the very beginning, when I first joined the club, I wanted to explain, well, this is what I was trying to say, and this is what I said, and I was feeling like, well, why didn't you see it? It's obvious to me.
Yeah.
But there was a part of me that realized, well, if it's not obvious, then I need to listen, So it's not something I struggled with a lot, although there were the times that I wanted to argue, well, no, it's obvious.
Yeah.
What I was trying to do is obvious. But now it's like if somebody doesn't get what I'm saying, sometimes I know it's because, well, they don't read fantasy, and I can tell by what they're saying. It's like they don't get it. They want me to explain a little more about the oddness of the world. And it's like, well, fantasy writers know to hold all this stuff in their minds for the first chapter to get all the odd stuff, to figure out how this world is different from the real world.
Right.
And some of the people in the group, they can't remember that two weeks before I had something in that 4 pages that I read, and I'm not going to say it again.
Right.
That's 4 pages that I read.
Yeah.
But usually whatever they say does have a grain of something that I can use, which is what I take from it. And that is something that I've learned.
Yeah.
From Toastmasters and from being part of critique groups.
Yeah, that's a good point, because sometimes it's hard to, either you're not in a place where you want to hear what people have to say, or they just really don't get you, which is totally fine. I mean, I went to grad school in another country that, they spoke English, but still it's a totally different culture. And here I am writing superhero, romance, urban fantasy, and other people are mostly writing, pretty literary stuff. Not everybody, but there was a lot of that. And, somebody's writing about this massive flood in this town from the standpoint of a tree that didn't get taken down in the flood. And I'm just in my head going, what? How am I? And you're just sitting there for the whole 5 minutes going, I have to think of something positive to say. I really like your descriptions, but I am not the target audience for this. I have no idea what's good or bad about it, because this does not sound like a story I would ever want to read. But then it would come around to me, and people are looking at me like, what? Superheroes? and somebody said superheroes are so passé, like we have too many stories about them, and this will never sell. And I'm just like,
and that was like 8 years ago, so
yeah.
Before all the Marvel
That's right. So I think it's really helpful for all of us to just try to remember we are not always the target market for whatever, but we can always find something to be encouraging about. And I think it's great that you were learning from going to Toastmasters all the time, like how many people were looking for what you were doing well and making sure that you knew it.
Yes, that was a big blessing.
Yeah. Now, do you feel like in your rewriting and editing and stuff like that, are you remembering or being consciously aware of things where you're like, well, I think I'm going to leave this in because I got a lot of good feedback on it? And I keep putting you on the spot as somebody who's more of a pantser, not a plotter. You can tell I'm such a plotter because I have all these plotter kinds of questions for you. Like you and I were just talking about a character. We were on the phone a week or so ago. We were talking about one of your characters and whether or not you should leave in this potential love triangle, love interest thing that was in one version but not in one version. And we were talking through like the kind of the pros and cons,
Right.
but also that we liked the character.
Yeah. So yes, I mean, it's hard sometimes to edit things out that I really like. Last night I was reading through when I was supposed to be outlining and making sure I was only pulling out the must-have scenes. I got sucked into reading through my
Right.
script, and I'm like, I wrote that? 10 years ago I wrote it. Or, maybe we shouldn't be saying how long it's taking me to write this book, but I got sucked. It's like, oh yeah, and then I get to this scene that's obviously another draft, but it's a really good scene, but it's after a lot of the action, but it's not written as though it's after the action. Right. It's like, okay, well, do I leave this scene in? And it's like, that's when I remembered, oh, well, you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing, Stephanie. You're supposed to be pulling out the must-have scenes, and then you can decide what other scenes need to remain.
Now, so when you're, like, it happens to be, we're making this interview recording at the middle of December, and just this morning you were at Toastmasters giving a speech, right?
Yes, that's right.
Okay. So when you were preparing the speech and trying to decide, whatever it is that you decide when you're creating a speech, were there moments when you were like, well, I want to leave this part in because it's cool, but then I'll be over the allotted number of minutes, and that because you get graded on whether or not you stick definitely to the time, right?
Yes, there's a certain time. Yes, usually what I do now that I've gotten used to giving speeches, when I first started, they were all written out and scripted, and I had to go by what my notes were. But usually now I get it together and get the facts that I want, or the stories or whatever I want, and the order, and then I write out whatever notes I need to help me remember. But in that are areas where I can either expand or condense if need be. And this particular time I had so much information because I was actually talking about this topic. I killed two birds with one stone. I prepared for this and I prepared for Toastmasters at the same time.
Nice.
And I had a whole list of examples, and some I didn't use because I noticed it's almost time, so I had to enter into my closing, which I knew was going to take about 30 seconds. So
yeah. Okay, so speaking as the plotter in the house right now, you're making me think, okay, that would help me too. I've done a little bit of, I've done public speaking, but nothing like Toastmasters, like not really being taught how to do it. I just always did it. I got involved in an extemporaneous speaking group in high school. And I was like, oh, this is so fun. I just get to talk. As you can imagine, I quite loved it. But so I can't believe I'm saying this because now this interview is going to go live and everyone will know and everyone will ask me how it's going. But I decided that in 2018, I'm going to take the Ray Bradbury challenge and write 52 short stories in 52 weeks.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it sounds equally exciting and terrifying.
Yes.
Now, my usual short story is 10 or 15,000 words long, which isn't really a short story anyway.
No, that's not a short story.
No. But
shorts.
Yeah, exactly. But I've given myself a limit. I've told myself I'm going to give myself 1 to 1.5 hours to write. Mm-hmm. And you're going to have to write it, Kitty, because I have a job. I have things to do.
Other things, yes.
I have other things to do. So I figure if I give myself 60 to 90 minutes, knowing that I need to get to the end of some sort of story by the end of that time, and then I'm going to give myself another 60 to 90 minutes to do all the editing and whatever else, I can do. And this is just going to be an exercise just to see what happens, what can come out of my brain. But because I've already been thinking for the last week or two, I think I'm going to do this thing. And I think I'm going to start it then in a couple of weeks. It's interesting. The things that you're talking about, I'm beginning to finally see like how Toastmasters and speechwriting really could influence how you're writing stories and editing? It sounds like mostly it's the editing of stories for you.
For me, it's the editing, yes.
Yeah. And then as the plotter, I was saying, I can see how that would help me in the writing of stories.
Yes, it could probably help you in the writing.
This is really interesting. I'm so glad that we decided to do this particular interview.
Good.
I like it.
Good. Yes, in preparing, I did a mind map, which can't be read right now because it's my chicken scratch handwriting. But if I get it together into I have a mind map program I can enter it into, and it'll be readable. I can give you a link before this goes live so that others can see it, because it has specifics of what's in each lesson and how I have used it.
So it's a mind map of
of the Toastmaster manual, the speaking manual.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, I do hope that you have time to do that before this goes out. And I'll put a link in the show notes so that everybody can see it. I'm really excited to see what that looks like. Okay. Well, thank you for joining us today. This has been great.
Well, thank you. I enjoyed it.
Now, I know that you have a couple of websites because you do some, actually, they're both kind of nonfiction. You tell us a little bit. You've got your design website and then your Stephanie Shackelford website. And what are we finding on those?
Yes, my Stephanie Shackelford website is just my personal website, which I have been pretty sporadic in putting anything up. And I haven't decided exactly what the goal is going to be, but I think I'm going to try to every day or 5 days a week next year write something, even if it's just, a 2-line quote, but just to force myself to be online regularly.
Right.
I've gotten to where I'm regularly writing something, even if it's only my journal, but I'm not online. I keep saying I'm going to get online and I'm not. So, but most of what I write will be on that blog.
Okay. So it looks like you and I both have some lofty 2018 short writing goals.
I actually like your goals, so it might kind of morph into writing stories too. So
that could be really fun.
Yeah, I like that goal. And then my business site is SaRoseDesign.com, and that's where I mostly graphic design, but a little bit of web design and web hosting I do there too.
Excellent. I'm going to put links to both of those in the show notes because your whole name is long and not necessarily easy to remember. Right. But also, just to be clear to everybody, Stephanie has been doing my book covers the last several months.
Yes, and having a wonderful time doing it.
It's been a lot of fun. If you need a book cover, you might have to look up Stephanie and see if she's the woman for you. Awesome. Well, thanks again. This really has been interesting. It's given me some food for thought.
Thank you for inviting me. I enjoyed it.
Cool. All right. Well, we'll talk to you more later. Thanks, Steph.
Okay. Bye-bye.